it's really important that Ukraine is not left out of this conversation. And it's great that President Trump is taking the time to speak to him immediately. I imagine that President Zelensky will point to the Kremlin's readout of the call, which differed from the White House readout. The Kremlin's readout reiterated many of these maximalist demands that Putin has that are red lines for Ukraine and truly would be existential threats to their security. So Zelensky will point to that. He'll talk about the damage that Ukraine saw overnight, but Zelensky will also smartly, I hope, thank the U.S. for the continued engagement and support, and also talk about Ukraine's willingness and desire for peace, because as we've seen, Putin and Russia are the obstacle.
So I guess just yesterday's call, some could read it as a disappointment that Russia did not agree to the ceasefire as Ukraine has done. Do you read it that way?
I am not surprised. I am disappointed with everything that Russia does, frankly, but I read it as positive, neutral, or slightly positive on the U.S. side. And that is actually more important because we did not see President Trump move away from support for Ukraine. We did not see him bend to many of these demands from Putin. And on the Russian side, they're stalling for time. President Putin is very good at playing people. And so I hope that Trump does not get played.
Well, to that point, what was interesting is that Steve Witkoff, the White House special envoy, said that we're going to trust Putin and take him at his word. What is the history in that happening?
The history is that you should never take Putin at his word. So again, as I said earlier, that's an optimistic take. Of course, you need to listen to what Putin is saying, but you also need to look at his actions. As for the history, Russia has violated ceasefire agreements with Ukraine. I don't know the exact number of times, but I think it's in between 100, 200 times over the Minsk agreements. And they continuously act aggressively, even after they say they won't, and that they want peace, that they care about saving human lives. And Putin has shown he doesn't even care about the lives of his own soldiers.
So I guess, White House Special Envoy Witkoff did say that the ceasefire could happen in a couple of weeks. Do you share that timeline view?
I think that could be realistic. It depends on what the U.S. continues to push on Russia. I do think that Putin and the Russians are hesitant to completely say no to Trump and risk hurting their warming relationship and angering him. So a ceasefire, there's a lot to work out on the technicality side. Ukraine is not the holdup, so we'll have to see. But I think I'd say sooner than a couple of weeks does not seem likely, but a lot of discussions can happen in a couple of weeks. So maybe.
Maybe. It doesn't sound like you're particularly optimistic necessarily. What role, if I'm paraphrasing you, what role do you think that Europe will be playing in this? Because we make a lot of hay about Germany expanding its ability to reindustrialize and rearm, but all of that's going to take a while. In your estimation, what does that part of the story look like?
That's a good question. And you were right in your paraphrasing of me. I'm not overly optimistic, but I do feel better when I look at the European angle. I don't see a European role in the upcoming negotiations on the ceasefire, which I think is a mistake because they have a huge stake here. But what has been great is that while the catalyst was unfortunate, following the Oval Office blow up with Trump and Zelensky, Europe really stepped up their commitment and their action. And we've seen a lot of progress, and they're trying to do more than just words and meetings. So we see movements about this idea of a coalition of the willing. That would be European forces to go in after a peace agreement. Of course, we're not there yet. We see more commitments on European defense, and the moves in Germany are really important. And this all adds up to signs and signals to Putin too. So I think it all is positive, but we might not see the immediate effect.